That's what it is, you know?
So far, his daughters have only been allowed to see him alone, 1 hour each, in the past 9 years.
He didn't want to see the children. The family beats him up all the time. The daughters especially.
The family says you've screened his phone calls for 9 years now.
Okay, I screened his phone calls for 1.5 years.
They say you screened it for longer.
I know what they say, but I'm telling you, I screened his phone calls for 1.5 years because when you treat chicks, the first thing you do is you change their environment.
This woman who asked not to be identified is a former Landy employee who says Landy is lying.
I was told that if Audrey, his mother, called, Brian was not allowed to take any calls.
She worked for Landy not in that first year, but within the last 2 years.
There was, in the time that I was there, not a single phone call that I was ever allowed to put through to Brian.
Screen calls, I've never heard of that before in my life. I don't know. Screen calls, there's no screen calls.
But they say you have systematically ensured that none of them can get to him.
That's crazy. He has had a number of lawyers who are all able to get him.
John Mason was
Mason was a major lawyer that got him out of the trust.
And he could always get him?
Mason got him ongoingly.
I could not reach Brian Wilson on the telephone in the entire 5 years that I represented him.
John Mason says he resigned 5 months ago after Brian Wilson, out of Landy's earshot, complained of having no freedom.
See if you can get Brian on the phone, will you?
And also raised questions about another kind of Landy control. He told us about a Beach Boys meeting last January. He says when Brian Wilson disagreed with Dr. Landy, Landy called a break, and Brian Wilson was given pills.
We went back in the meeting, and Brian's eyes were rolled up behind his eyelids, and he couldn't communicate anymore.
2 other participants in that meeting have supported Mason's story, though Landy denies it and says Wilson's medication is controlled by a licensed psychiatrist.
I do not give drugs to Brian.
Now they've got me on medicine that keeps me in an even place so I don't go, woo, out of control high or whoa down low. You know what I mean?
I think it's time for someone who has been on the inside of Brian Wilson's life to stand up and try to put an end to this terrible relationship.
You think Eugene Landy has completely brainwashed Brian Wilson?
Yes, I do.
Does brainwashing mean conditioning a person's mind to act and react in a certain way to things?
Yes, it means taking control so that the person believes what you tell them to believe.
No, so in other words, when you're brainwashing to believing something.
Yeah, believing something about the world.
Oh, I see. Okay, good. Great. Yeah, no. There has been none of that. No.
I have not, quote, brainwashed him, which is what they say.
But in 1988, the authorities in charge of Landy's psychology license had their own say about the doctor. They investigated not just the Wilson case, but a charge of patient rape, which Landy had settled out of court. An accusation of freebasing cocaine. Landy denied it. Finally, in a plea bargain, Landy agreed to surrender his license, pleading guilty to 1 count of illegally giving prescription medicine to Brian Wilson. So Landy could no longer officially be Wilson's therapist. He found another job. He called it life manager. He became Wilson's business partner in a company called Brains and Genius.
Brains is Brian, the A and the I reversed. And Genius is obvious.
We're told Landy's new income pays as well as his last, that he gets $35,000 a month plus extra fees. Brian Wilson has a new autobiography out this week. Landy's take of the profits, the same as Wilson. And if the book becomes a movie, Landy will get a lot of money for that, too. And it doesn't stop there. When Wilson got a yellow Corvette for doing a Chevrolet commercial, Landy got one, too. When Wilson got an upright piano, Landy got a baby grand. Meanwhile, Brian Wilson lives in a rented house. The one he owns is being used by Dr. Landy, who also arranged for Brian to pay $500,000 to renovate it.
They think that Dr. Landy takes financial advantage of you.
Financial advantage?
That he's getting rich off of you.
Well, who says that? How does anybody think that?
Members of your family.
Is that based on fact? Is that information that's factual, or is it just a suspicion?
Do you know how much you're paying, Dr. Landy?
You mean per
year?
I wish not to tell that.
And the family says the money isn't all.
Rainbow eyes, red, yellow, blue.
These are Landy's lyrics from his second album with Wilson. The album has been rejected by Warner Records. And so the family says the doctor who was supposed to rescue a Beach Boy has now become a parody of a Beach Boy himself, a flagrant violation of his profession's code of ethics.
Brian had a lot to teach me. I'll tell you what it was.
Psychologists say it's
Go ahead.
unconscionable to be in a dual, triple, quadruple relationship with a client that they don't know whether you were his doctor or his backup singer, his lyricist or his therapist.
I don't disagree with that. Brian Wilson was not a traditional therapy.
That's for sure. We found his original contract, showing early on the doctor was positioned to reap financial benefit from co-writing music with a vulnerable patient.
But Dr. Landy, there is a rule against that. It's against the code of your profession.
It's a rule that I can't explain it to you.
It's the code of your profession.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. I not only have accepted that, I know that.
And you violated it.
But I didn't do it.
But you were preparing to take a piece of a business transaction with your patient.
Yes. Negotiated by his lawyers, my lawyers, Brother Records lawyers, the manager, and everybody.
This is between you and the ethics of your profession. It has nothing to do with all the people who negotiated it.
What you're saying is valid. In this whole situation, I never hurt Brian. I never intended in any way to do anything unethical.
I may not always love you.
On November 18th, the California Superior Court will decide for itself about Dr. Eugene Landy and Brian Wilson.
So sure about it, and God only knows what I'd be without you.
We should point out that next month the court will also consider whether the family can give Brian the help he needs. As Landy points out, Brian's brother Dennis Wilson died in an alcohol-related accident in 1983. By the way, after our interview with Dr. Landy, we found documents from two doctors saying for 6 months in the mid-'80s, Landy himself was disabled by psychiatric problems. I asked Dr. Landy to discuss this with us on camera, and he declined. And we also found a source who said that she had seen a draft will for Brian Wilson, a draft which gave Eugene Landy the bulk of everything Wilson has.